October Revolution marks the end of the British colonial era in Yemen. Special envoy braves the Security Council and says Houthis demands block truce extension. War has forced Yemeni women to find alternative means to support their families. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. The 14th of October 1963, the start of the first spark of the revolution in the south against British colony. The revolution expelled the British forces from all fronts after an occupation that lasted 129 years. On this occasion, the popular resistance organized in Maghreb Governorate a ceremony to mark the 59th anniversary of the glorious October Revolution. The ceremony included military speeches, literary lyrics on the role played by the revolutionaries who came out of Radfan Mount, and ended with the expulsion of British troops from southern Yemen.
We are pleased to celebrate today with the 59th anniversary of the 14th of October Revolution here in Maghreb, the castle of the Republic. We affirm that we still move forward to accomplish the goals of the revolutions of September and October against the imamate represented in the Houthi coup and against all the ideas that aim at driving Yemen back to the colonial era. The October Revolution is the birth of a country and an emergence of a nation. It has liberated the Yemeni nation from the colonial fort. It was preceded by the 26th September Revolution, which is the mother of all Yemeni revolutions.
The UN Security Council held its monthly meeting to discuss the situation in Yemen. The United Nations Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, briefed the Council on the developments of the humanitarian truce, which ended on the 2nd of October. In his remarks, Grunberg expresses regret the failure to extend the truce, adding that it was the Houthis' incredible demands that led to the failure of the truce efforts. The UN envoy urged the warring parties to quickly engage with his expansion proposal while praising the collaboration of the government. Chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad Al-Alimi, received in Riyadh U.S. envoy Tim King and the U.S. ambassador. The meeting discussed the latest developments in the Yemeni situation and exchanged talks about efforts to renew the humanitarian truce. Head of the PLC affirmed commitment to a comprehensive and sustainable peace approach based on the agreed references. Chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council called upon the European Union to push the Houthi militia in order to deal positively and responsibly with peace efforts. This report gives more details.
Rashad Al-Alimi, the president of Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council, has urged European diplomats to increase pressure on Houthi forces in order to drive them toward peace. According to Yemeni government sources, Alimi met in Riyadh with the European Union's Assistant Secretary General and the EU's Deputy Director of the Middle East and North Africa Department. According to sources, the conference discussed current events in Yemen, ongoing efforts to restore the humanitarian truce, and the need for European pressure to persuade the Iranian-backed Houthis to actively participate in the peace process. The two sides also addressed the EU's role in assisting the Presidential Leadership Council and the government in improving services and alleviating humanitarian suffering in Yemen. On Monday, Alimi met with Saudi Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman, who reiterated the coalition's support for the Council and the country's security, peace, and stability. According to Yemeni and Saudi official sources, the conference discussed the UN's efforts to extend the truce and alleviate human suffering, as well as the future actions needed to deal with new potential developments. Saudi backing for the Council and Yemeni calls for Europe to put more pressure on the Houthis come as a pro-Iran group continues to reject the UN plan to prolong the truce suggested by UN envoy Hans Grunberg. Yemeni Foreign Minister Ahmed Awad bin Mubarak met with US Ambassador Stephen Fagan on Monday in Riyadh to address recent developments and the ramifications of the Houthi militia's opposition to efforts to prolong the UN truce. The Houthi militia's terrorist threats against oil companies and civilian oil facilities were described by the Yemeni foreign minister as a dangerous escalation, the effects of which will not only harm Yemen's infrastructure and economy, but will expand to reach the region and international energy supplies. He emphasized that the international community has to take a strong and divisive stance in response to such terrorism.
Defense Minister Mohsen Eldari met in Riyadh with Saudi Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman bin Abdulaziz. During the meeting, the two sides discussed the latest developments, aspects of joint cooperation between the two countries in the military and defense fields, and the efforts of the United Nations to extend the truce. The Saudi Defense Minister affirmed that the coalition support the Yemeni government to end the crisis. The spokesman of the coalition to support the legitimacy in Yemen, General Turki al-Malki, announced that coalition and the Houthis delegations exchanged visits to handle the war prisoners issue. Turki al-Malki described the move as a goodwill initiative that aims at building confidence as part of efforts to renew the truce.
Two delegations from the Syria-led coalition in Yemen and the Houthi militia exchanged prisoners of war, the Syria State News Agency has reported. Coalition spokesman Brigadier General Turki al-Malki described Wednesday's move as a goodwill initiative that aims at building confidence as part of efforts to renew a United Nations brokered truce that expired on the 2nd of October. Al-Malki said the visit is a humanitarian one that handles the detainees issue in a pure humanitarian approach. He said it was made possible as one of the gains of the truce and the efforts to extend it, in addition to further expanding its humanitarian, economic, and livelihood gains for the Yemeni people, and kickstarting the political process and reaching comprehensive peace in Yemen. Meanwhile, head of the Houthi National Committee for Prisoners' Affairs said the list of the POWs was agreed on during negotiations in the Jordanian capital, Amman. He added that a technical team from the committee went to Saudi Arabia, and a technical team from Saudi Arabia came to Sana'a to confirm the list of names. The swap of POWs comes amid intensive regional and international efforts to push Yemeni sides towards extending the truce. For its part, the U.S. State Department said its envoy for Yemen, Tim Lunderking, is making a visit to the region to discuss the truce. It said the Houthis have an opportunity to support an expanded truce agreement that would provide millions of Yemenis an immediate relief. This would also include much-needed civil servant salary payments, opening routes to and through Taiz and across the country, more flight destinations from Sana'a, and a path to a durable, inclusive Yemeni-led peace process, the State Department added.
A soldier from the government forces was killed east of Taiz due to Houthi shelling. Military sources indicated that the militia bombed positions of the government forces and residential villages in Mount Han, west of Taiz. With heavy weapons, government forces positions in Makbana were also targeted by the fires of the rebels. Clashes between the joint forces and the Houthi militia erupted in Maurice Front north of El Dala. Yemen Today correspondent confirmed that the clashes took place in the eastern sector of Maurice Front after monitoring Houthi movements, their attempt to infiltrate towards the sides of the joint forces. Our correspondent confirmed that the militia members suffered heavy losses. Women in Yemen bear the heaviest brunt of war. They were obliged to look for a source of living to feed their children amid hard economic and living conditions. More on this is within the following report.
The war and the deteriorating economic conditions continue to destabilize the lives of thousands of Yemeni families and put people's lives at stake. With poverty knocking on every household's door, families are unable to secure their daily food, and housewives are now compelled to join the labor force to search for a source of livelihood that guarantees them a safe and stable life. The Executive Unit for Displaced Persons has recently monitored a surge in displacement amounting to nearly 1 million individuals. For many of these IDPs, minimum food baskets are unattainable.
Due to the dire living conditions, the displaced people suffer in Ma'rib and the lack of humanitarian aid coming into the city. Many families have resorted to non-traditional means of securing income.
The vast majority of displaced families struggle with food insecurity and unstable income. Additionally, a portion of these families lack a male breadwinner, which forces many women to take on the burden of managing the household and covering living expenses alone. On the streets of Ma'rib, Nasreen is working hard to promote her goods and sell the largest amount of women's clothing. She states that her financial struggles have compelled her to look for employment to support her children.
The economic instability and the rise of the dollar and the Saudi riyal have forced us to work to provide for our children. My husband is sick and he can't work. We have decided to band together as women and start working to conquer these unfortunate circumstances. My daughter is sick and I have to provide for her because my husband is mentally ill. He takes his medication twice a day. I don't have any family that can help me financially. I've worked even while sick and pregnant.
The war and displacement have forced many women to engage in trade and labor, which have been the preserve of men for many years. Economic responsibilities are now relegated to women who are faced with a sudden need to market and to provide. Wives, mothers, and daughters bear the brunt of men's absence, taking on new responsibilities with no preparation.
The war has overshadowed all sectors in Yemen. Women struggle to have access to medical services because most of the health facilities have been damaged by the war. This report has more details.
Yemen, the poorest country in the Arab States region and one of the highest countries that have violations against women, is now experiencing a complex war and humanitarian crisis. According to the UN, over 76% of Yemenis are in need for humanitarian assistance. The situation of women and girls in Yemen is very challenging, and conflict has added layers of vulnerability for women and girls, and aggravating existing gender inequalities. And in 2017, Yemen was ranked at the bottom of the gender gap. Not only that, but Yemen has earned the worst place in the world to be a woman, as Yemeni women face attacks at checkpoints if they were unaccompanied by a male relative, and attacks during protests, including harassment, arbitrary detention, and torture, and other ill treatment by the Houthi forces, and increased domestic violence. Against this backdrop, UN Women Yemen seeks to address issues of structural gender inequality and to meet the urgent needs of women and girls. In doing so, it implements a variety of projects, from assisting vulnerable women in places of detention to supporting women's rights actors working for peace. The Houthi militia has committed many abuses against Yemeni women. No freedom, no health care, and no safety. And now women's participation and leadership in the public sphere is low. Economic participation and political empowerment in Yemen at 138 of 142 countries. For Yemeni women record low levels of involvement in formal paid work. In addition, that women in Yemen face bullying and high rates of violence against them, including forced and early marriage. In this light, UN system to provide coordination and normative and program support to strengthen gender equality and women's empowerment efforts. They are working with their partners to eliminate discrimination against women and girls, empower women, and provide a relatively normal life for Yemeni women.
Houthis continue to deploy the educational system in Yemen. Welcome back. 5 commercial flights of Yemeni Airlines have arrived back and forth between Sana'a and Jordan since the humanitarian truce ended 11 days ago. More than 2,700 Yemeni travelers benefited from these flights within 7 days, bringing the number of passengers since the beginning of the truce that entered into force in early April to about 30,000 passengers. Houthis continue to deploy the educational system in Yemen. At first, they injected the content of the curriculum with their sectarian ideology. Then they hired their affiliates to work as teachers. Recently, they changed the examination system. The following report has more details.
Start of this month, children around the world are returning to school, while Yemeni parents are concerned about sending their children to schools, as many schools have been destroyed since the start of the conflict. Parents may have lived through 7 years of bombing or had to flee their homes, but they still care deeply about their children and their education. Schools in Yemen have been destroyed, damaged, or occupied at least 380 times since 2015. There are several schools that has no roofs, doors, classrooms, or any educational facilities, even though that they are meant to be protected under international law. Yet, by 2019, UNICEF found that 1 in 5 schools could no longer be used because of the conflict. Even school buses have been hit. During this week, the militia has shared a statement that includes a change in school testing systems, as they adjusted grade 6 and grade 9 tests to be done through national schools instead of being done through the Ministry of Education. On top of this, hundreds of thousands of children have fled the war and are now being squeezed into classrooms wherever they have settled. Most don't have textbooks, exercise books, or even pens. And despite that, Yemeni considers education vital to eliminating poverty and is focused on ensuring that all children have access to quality education. The country's development plans constantly prioritize human development and the education of the labor force. While access to basic education has improved, Yemen still faces significant challenges, including girls' enrollment and emergency or conflict-afflicted areas. Since the Houthi coup started, it affected economic, political, and educational aspects. Therefore, people in Yemen struggle on different levels, and children in Yemen deserve to have a better education and definitely a better life.
The United Nations renewed its call on donors to quickly convert their pledges into cash in order to start implementing the emergency plan to rescue the Safer oil tanker. The United Nations office said that donors pledged $75 million to implement the emergency operation of transporting oil from the Safer to a safe ship. Central Bank Governor Ahmed Ghalib discussed in Washington with the International Monetary Fund obtaining a financial facility to address the food insecurity in the country. Ghalib stressed that Yemen is one of the countries most affected by the war and the rise in international prices, which aggravated the humanitarian situation in the country. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. October Revolution marks the end of the British colonial era in Yemen. Special Envoy briefs the Security Council and says Houthis demands block truce extension. War has forced Yemeni women to find alternative means to support their families. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. See you soon.